proper.
We're tasting our 2019 vintage Hamilton Russell Walker Bay Pinot Noir. I did have a question earlier why the black band on the capsule, which we don't normally do. That's just to show people that it is in fact Walker Bay. You know, we don't typically have a Walker Bay Pinot Noir because of the fire in 2019 that destroyed most of our crop. We decided to see what was available, and some of our very kind neighbors in the Emul and Arde had some grapes available for sale, and we decided to make Pinot Noir from those. So this wine's in fact only got 16% of Hamilton Russell fruit in, the stuff that was least affected by the smoke. On the label as well, you can see it just says Hamilton Russell, not the normal Hamilton Russell vineyards. So it was obviously quite a tragic event for us. It was a beautiful crop, as I think most of you know. The 2019 was amazing. But with the smoke tank, it would have been foolish of us to bottle that wine, or the bulk of it. Even though we had tastings and many people couldn't really pick up the smoke taint, it is something that can develop in the wine and make it unpleasant to drink. So I think the 2019 came out very well. It was nice in the sense that we could actually make a Emul and Arde wine. It says Walker Bay on the label, but it's fruit from all three appellations within the Emul and Arde. Made in the sort of Hamilton Russell style. I didn't do much different from a winemaking point of view as I would have, except we did ferment because of possible smoke taint. Fermentations they weren't rushed, but we didn't do extended skin contact or anything in this vintage. And I think it's a beautiful wine. It's a bit more fruit forward than Hamilton and Russell usually is, and I think that if you taste some of the different producers' wines, I think Hamilton Russell is usually the one that's got the least fruit perfume and things on the palate. It's usually a bit more structured, but this for me is a very good representation maybe of a Emul and Arde blend. I really like the sort of aromatics on it. I think it's nice and clean. It's obviously our usual oak regime, and nice red and darker fruits, nice spice on the palate from the oak, and I think a wine that for the crisis we were facing, one that turned out very well, thanks to help from the rest of the area. So we chuffed with this. It's basically it's almost like a adopted child that we still love. It's not it's very little of our own fruit in there, but it's I think there is still a house style which is very pleasant in the wine. 2019 without smoke taint was amazing vintage.
Yeah. But kudos to you guys for jumping in and doing all this work. I think a lot of us have learned from the tragedy.
It does explain on the back label for those of you that are interested. I know no one reads a back label in the wine industry, but it does explain why it was done.
And I think if the wine stands out in a vertical one day, there's a story behind it. And the 2019 Galton Peak, I think I'm going to reiterate a lot of what Emul said. It was a vintage that was very well received. Cropping levels were up above our long-term average. Quality was really good. And again, Galton Peak, a blend of 7 vineyards we have on the farm. It's also a vintage that qualified for Tete Cuvée, so we bottled a Tete, which in some years actually leaves the Galpen Peak a bit short, but I don't think in this vintage. I think this vintage the wine is still holding up very well, stylistically typical of Bouchard Finlayson, savoury notes, more muscular in style, and very typical of what we achieve in our vineyards. But without sounding negative, the 11th of January is really burnt into my mind as well. And therefore I think a vintage of ups and downs. Obviously we've just heard from Emul, the low points, but the cooperation that all the vintners, everybody jumped in to help each other. That was really a highlight. And just realizing that Mother Nature, what she offers, it can easily be taken away, and you have one day that side of the fence and this side of the fence. We were very fortunate to be fairly untouched. I mean, we had one vineyard that we had to exclude, but yes, it's ups and downs. So this wine I think is a bit of a celebration to us, that we could still manage to continue this good run of vintages that I think we've all been on for some time. So happy with the wine. Like I've mentioned, typical Bouchard Finlayson savoury notes, more dense, densely woven fruit, less aromatics that we'll find higher up in the valley. I think the wine speaks possibly loudest for itself.
Lovely red fruit on this as well, with the savouriness too.
It is definitely showing more than other vintages that I've.
Is the oak regime the same as normal?
It's yes, very much. About 28% new oak. We use the same two coopers that we've been using now for about 5 years. We started incorporating a little bit of blonde toasting as well from this vintage, but pretty much the same regime.
It integrates very well. I don't know if it's because of the blonde toasting or the vintage, but I find sometimes that your wines need sort of just a little bit, like a year in bottle before it really integrates. I remember this vintage from when it was bottled, and it's just the oaking's been spectacular on it.
Thanks.
It's a good mood.
Yeah, no, I think we're fortunate to work with good coopers, and as we all know, oak plays a large role in supporting your wine. And yes, I think we're really finding our feet very well with the oaking, which I think also brings another layer to the wine, an interesting part of the wine. I don't know if it's worth the stress of fermenting spontaneously, but it's there.
Yeah, so tonight we're actually tasting something different from Bosman. Usually with the Pinot Noir Celebration we have our magnum opus, which is a single vineyard expression, but the grey label is our Upper Emul and Arder Valley Pinot Noir, obviously 2019 vintage. But again, it's actually a four vineyard parcel wine, and this is a range that the Bosman started in 2015. So they acquired the farm in here in Hermanus in the year 2000, and they basically converted an apple farm and started planting vineyards. So the oldest vineyard, Pinot Noir vineyard, was planted in 2006. So the age range from 2006, or plantings from 2006 to 2014, and I think what stood out in 2019 for me is the fact that we had a bit of a drier winter, and also with the heat waves that we saw in the end of January and the beginning of Feb, actually it was quite hard with this Pinot Noir, and to a certain extent kind of caught me off guard. I did pick it a bit riper than what we would usually do, so you'll actually find that the wine for Upper Emul and Arder Valley shows a bit more of a savoury, earthy notes compared to perfume, red fruit notes that we would usually see. But I think overall I'm very happy with the quality of the wine. We had good temperatures in the summer and the ripening season, so in terms of quality and the crop size that we got, we're quite pleased with the 2019 vintage. And I think stylistically, what I try to do with this wine is, because we've taken 4 different parcels, is looking at the vineyard blocks and what it brings. Mostly dryland farm, so again the fact that we had less water in the winter and warmer season show that we actually picked a bit 1 week to 2 weeks earlier, but still shows good concentration in the wine. Soft tannins because I like to keep it on the lees, so I would leave it on the lees for over winter. And depending on the ripeness of the blocks, I would do a whole bunch again to try and promote that fruit. And I think it turned out quite balanced, and these wines always love to stay in the bottle, so it's been in the bottle for a year. But yeah, overall we're very happy with the 2019 vintage.
You get a lovely feel of ripeness and sweetness, but also there's lovely top notes of florals as well with it. So.
Yeah, a bit layered as well, especially with the oak use. So we sticked with that 20% yew oak, still 12 months. So I think how it integrated with the wine and how the wine has the layers shown even with the components. So I keep everything separately up until like 10 months or 8 months before we bottle. So then I would put everything together. So it's actually nice to see how the vineyards and the plots develop over time as well.
And that single vineyard, is that also included, the one that you bottled before? That's not included
No, so
in
that
this?
2019 is a separate bottling, yes.
Was there any particular reason that you decided to go with the upper and not the magnum, the open?
Because the magnum opus is not yet released,
Oh.
so we're a bit behind on that one. So, but I think that's what I love about the valley, the fact that we have even this one. The acid is quite low, but you have that vibrant acidity or freshness in the wines,
Yes.
and so I'm not scared to age the wines. I know in the magnum opus will show well in a year or two as well. So.
Our 2019 family vineyards. For me, 2019, I find it's the start of a trend of later ripening vintages. I find quite a similarity between 1920 and 21, and that break away from the drought years, the kind of 2015 to 2017, and then 2018 kind of being that bit of transition period. You know, it was a bit of a weird year, 2018. But 2019, there were some pros and cons. I mean, I think the cons for us is that our volumes on some of our older vineyards, like Mullis and Sea Dragon, were quite low, just low fertility. And I'm starting to become concerned. Also looked quite a bit at the winters that we've had over the last couple of years, and definitely our cold units are shifting later. And I'm starting to become concerned if that's kind of just put the vine out of routine, and if it's had an effect on fertility. But nevertheless, you know, we had some crops 2 to 3 tons a hectare, where we would normally get 4 or 5. You know, when you hit 2, it starts to hurt. But very happy with the wine. I mean, it's after a few years of drought and really having these quite robust wines and robust tannin structures. It's good to see a lot of, especially in the upper Emul and Ada, where we've got, you know, a bit more of that free draining topsoil. These bit of red fruit and perfume coming off the noses. Also saw quite a bit of that in Wind and Sea. Yeah, from the long ripening, just quite supple structure, supple tannins. I think, well, our 2019 I don't think is open quite now, but it's going to take a while to open up, and I think these wines will age extremely well.
Yeah. It's definitely for me one of your more sort of tighter, closed. You know, it's not in a reductive sense, but it's definitely tightly wound.
Yeah, we were quite generous with whole bunch.
Yeah.
You know, Wind and Sea usually gets, you know, in a bad year for it, we take it down to about 20%. In a good year, well, in a normal year, about 30%, and we push it up to 40%. So yeah, you get a bit of that spiciness and, you know, a couple of those austere characters hanging around. But it's one of the things I like kind of from these years, is that your fruit is never too sweet,
Yeah.
and it just allows these other earthy flavors to come in and play a part. I mean, looking forward to 2020 and 2021 as well. I mean, it's 2020 for us was the first vintage over 100 days from flowering to harvest. That's kind of the normal standard for Burgundy, and that's something I haven't seen in the Himmel and Ade for 20 years. And kind of, well, it'll be interesting to see where the trend of our seasons is going, and you know, whether we're having this up and down and weather events because of climate change, I don't know. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, on the other hand, you know, as JC said, you know, there's kind of never a bad vintage in the Himmel and Ade, just a different representation, a different expression. And yeah, definitely, I think over all the wines, I just see a lot more kind of red fruit, bit of energy. You know, that to me is a very good indicator for 2019.
So what we're tasting tonight is our 2019 vintage of Le Luc. Le Luc is a single vineyard Pinot Noir. It's a relatively small vineyard, 1.3 hectares, and it was planted out in 2013. So this is the third bottling of that vintage, and really happy with 2019. I thought that I was really worried because there was that the rain that we had in mid-January, but it never really materialized as heavily as we thought it was going to, and we ended up with slightly later picking than I had done in the previous years, but I think that what it did was just gave that wine a little bit more fruit than I in the previous two vintages have picked at, and you know, this vineyard is on really interesting soils. It's a very heavy coffee clip and sandy topsoil, and below that, about 500 millimeters, half a meter below, is this really heavy decomposed granite clay. And at this age now, those roots are just starting to tap into those clay layers, and I think that the vineyard's just starting now to come of age, and it's reflecting itself in the wine. And what I'm finding here is that pretty sort of expected upper Himmel and Ade lift to the wine. You know, it's got this vibrant acidity, it's fresh, there's lovely sort of fruit purity in the wine, but behind it all is structure. The tannins, I think, are still quite young in the sense that I make the wines to age. The wine is very young still. I think that another 4 or 5 years in bottle, the tannins will really start to come into their own. But the structure is there. The fruit side of it is quite typical of restless fruit, where we steer quite clear of any sweetness. So the wine is, our Pinots are relatively dry, much like our other wines as well. So we have very little residual sugar left in these wines. They are dry, they've got good fresh acidity, not too much fruit because of the time that we're picking. And they are very much table wines, so wines to eat with. The higher the higher acidity really cuts through the food that you're eating, keeps the palate fresh, and the lack of sweetness also keeps the food more the hero than the wine on the table. And in some respects, it's more of a European style of Pinot that I'm aiming for. I don't always achieve it, but I'm relatively new to it. But I'm not too concerned about having a fruit-driven wine. So these are dry, savory, more acid-driven, structured wines that need time. 2019, like it's been discussed already, we're sort of coming out of the drought years. It was I think, quite a special vintage. I got a little bit more than I expected. That's why, to me, it is special. But overall, I think for the third vintage on Restless, it's a wine that I'm pretty happy with, and I think that it's a wine that people need to just give a little bit more time, and enjoy in 3 or 4 years' time. with a good meal. Thank you.
There's nothing wrong with that, huh? Now we're just waiting for the meal.
3-4 years.
This meal you promised.
Craig, do you think it's? I mean, how does 20 and 21 compare? Because I think that 19 was a huge step up in quality.
I didn't do anything different. It was identical vinification. The only thing was, the vines were 10% older, which is quite significant. Maybe even higher, 15% older. And I picked it slightly later, so there was a little bit more fruit in the wine than the previous wines. Now, to understand the previous wines, I was very focused on trying to figure out what these vineyards are and what the fruit is. And if you are really genuinely trying to find out what you've got, what your building blocks are, it's really important to pick relatively early so that your fruit isn't masking everything, and your alcohol as a result of your higher sugar isn't masking anything, and also to be very restrained on your oaking. But from a vinification point of view, nothing's really different in terms of oaking regimes, punch downs, fermentation. That's all standard. It's all natural ferments. Very little actual punch downs and no pump overs. Mostly work just keeping the cap wet and more of that infusion. So I think it's also a great journey of the vineyard, where we're seeing the vineyard aging and the roots, like I mentioned earlier, starting to tap into the clay layer, getting through that first 500 meters of sand and coffee clip. And it makes sense to me that the wine will start to evolve as the vineyard ages.
Do you do post-ferment maceration much?
Not really. I do it a lot on Cabernet, but not on the Pinot.
Okay.
No. I do work with some whole bunch though.
Yeah.
This year I layered quite a bit. So that sort of lasagna thing where I layered whole berry, whole bunch, and crushed, destemmed, just built up these layers inside the fermentation tanks.
Alright, so where's your label?
Yeah, I'm still looking for it. But, no, so tonight we're showing our 2019 Noir. Label still coming, but reason for that is mostly because we're not on 19 vintage yet. So we just thought, well, everyone else is showing a 19, so we'll also show a 19, which is cool for me because it's something I made as well. So so 19 was my second year at La Vierge. It's the Noir, the way I saw it, it's our flagship Pinot. It was also one of our first labels that we made, and it's something. Well, it's always been one of our main focuses on showing something what we deem as slightly some of our better blocks. So it's a blend of two blocks which are pretty much adjacent to each other, roughly about the same age, planted in 2008 as well, and 9. But and mostly actually in this blend mostly 777 clone. So there's a little bit of 115 from the one, but mostly on the other side of the block, or the other block next to it is 777. So it's roughly about, give or take, just under 50%, or 50% if we have to call it. I'm not going to get too specific, but about 50% of the two blocks. I think it's quite, for me, quite La Vierge in a sense. On our vineyards, Babylon, I think one thing I do find from those vineyards, so from my time there, it's been, you do find that there's always quite a prominent fruit, powerful, almost like quite a big, larger expression of fruit. I do feel that you get up there. Also kind of shows that in some ways slightly in the tannin structure as well, especially with the 777 components, do show a slightly larger and broodier type of characteristics on the wine. But I don't think it's for me. It's quite. I do see that annual or yearly, so it's like it almost seems like that spot kind of shows me that where I do like that it's slightly more darker in a sense than some of my other blocks that I do have. So it is. It's quite nice fruit to work with. It's in terms of vinification, not really too much anything special. This year's the first year I played a little bit with a whole bunch of components, just starting to see what it actually does, just trying to teach myself something. So yeah, it's a bit of a trial. I think, you know, I also think that I'm starting to sort of also find a slightly bit more standard style on this label itself, because I do think that also takes a bit of time just to figure that out. And some years I think, you know, you do learn a lot from, you know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and I think, you know, at least you're going forward with that. So I think in terms of typicity, I would say like it's very Babylon, you know, site specific. So I do like that, and at least it shows that we're not overplaying our hands in the cellar and trying to take that away from, you know, what it actually shows. So so yeah, I mean, it's also been in bottle for a year. I think, you know, release will probably be, you know, maybe 2 years or something from now. So it'll still be in the bottle for a while. It's a style also that's made to be slightly older. That's why we do keep it back a little bit. Also, interesting enough, we also full dry land, so I do think that has an effect on every vintage we're going to do. So, which is quite cool to see that, you know, how that plays out and how that also, you know, develops. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, I mean, I'm fairly happy where it's sitting now. I don't think there's anything that bothers me too much. I think it's, you know, I quite like that it's, for me, quite typical of our side. You know. And yeah.
It's for me the first in Oregon that always said 777's got a cola character. I call it cola tonic. That sort of cordial stuff you get. It's the first time that I've tasted that on 777 from South Africa. It's a very nice expression of it. It's not as sweet as you get in Oregon. So it's a very nice, almost tart. The sugar acid balance is very good on the palate.
Okay.
Is it all Babylon fruit?
Yeah. So everything. It's all our fruit goes into and stuff. It's only from.
Do you only have vineyards on Babylon?
Yeah.
Pinot.
Well, we have those Sauvignons next to the cellar as well, but those are.
Those don't qualify as vineyards.
Yeah, is that a vineyard?
It's coming.
This is that is your contribution to the Herman Valley.
I just want to say it's coming.
We're waiting.
I mean, like, some things take a bit longer, so we'll get there. Like,
we've been told your viticultural skills are impressive, so we're watching.
Yeah, I don't know if you think this season.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's not.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you got
There's only so much someone can do.
When you got a lot on your plate, I think.
Also 19, obviously. Reserve
Check,
19.
check.
Just check if they get the right bottle. Yeah, I think 19 was a very good year overall. But that said, that is how I experienced the ridge. 19 was still for us a touch warm year. We normally not really that geared up that we already go sugar reading in January, and we was already suddenly out in the field looking for what's going on in sugar terms. So it was an early start in the spring, and when that in spring starts early, obviously you will ending up to have a relative early harvest. And just finishing now 21 harvest, I most probably 6 months ago would be super happy about 19 to showcase, but when I see 21, who was again for me much more vintage, who I feel comfortable with, to have this long hanging time and much more relaxed approach in harvest, that there was no rush. We really got nearly more worried how the sugar level comes up, but the acid was there. So for me, it's a great vintage. I think it's a very, it's quite a showy vintage in a way. It is just good. It has the flavor profile you would expect. It has a smooth elegance. The mouthfeel is there. I also believe it has the aging potential. But I think 21, for example, we go again to more slightly a touch more edgy wines. Who, in a way, I think older you get, you're looking more for edgy wines. That's maybe you're giving the age away at certain stages. But I'm very happy to showcase from the Herman and the 19 vintage. I think it goes like a kind of a line to the whole different wards. They all has their merits, each individual wine. In our specific case, how we are approaching Pinot at that stage, and I think we also had a slightly evolution and journey on our wine estate was, I still believe that young vineyards, it's great to make wine, but it's not the same satisfactory profile to make wine when you have older vines, older vineyards. And reaching now close 20 years, we can see the evolution in which direction we go. And I still believe 20 years is still young for plants. But we took the call after 10 years plus to go much more into single vineyards. So the reserve is a single vineyards, but we have Emma's also single vineyards, the Arc is a single vineyards, the marketing team goes up and down because they don't know what's happening downstairs with how many single vineyards we want to showcase. But I think when it comes to Pinot Noir, you want to reflect a certain site, and that's all about when you have the expression of maybe all the plants to really showcase at its best. And we, I think we're very blessed that the terroir, even when you would overall look a map, it looks pretty similar soil-wise on our farm. But when you look into the kind of vinification parcel by parcel, it has completely different approaches in stylistic. Who makes it maybe also more complicated, because end of the days, I mean, there's not such things as what is the best. You have maybe somewhere a little bit more perfume, the other one has the darker berry, the one has more structure. So it is like a whole selection you can choose from, and you can express yourself on different slopes, aspects, clones. When it comes to vintage, I think it's also for me quite critical to talk the way through. Yes, you have the climatic circumstances, but I think in vintage, it's always also important how performed your vineyards as such. And you know, sometimes we have an exceptional good block who just comes together in a year, even maybe the weather was tricky, but somehow we are avoiding shriveling, sunburn, of whatever we manipulating the whole growing season. And some other years we do wrong, you know, we maybe take the leaves away too much on the wrong time, on the wrong side. And all what drives us is basically to improve, and each time we spot the mistake, we want to try next year to not make the same mistake, and nature will keep you humble enough, because you think this year you did everything right, and then end of the year you figure out it was again another maybe little mistake you did. From our perspective, what I really become quite comfortable in my own skin, how I make wine, is that we on the red wine, we took the call now for 2017 onwards, is we took a complete backseat in a way that we don't use any products by side of sulfur. So we don't use any enzymes, tannins, finings, or whatever, yeasts. And in the beginning, I was a little bit worried about that decision. But I think more you start to work in this direction, more you come comfortable to really work with the grapes. And I think the true reflection, end of the day, is of your estate. It is most probably with little intervention reflecting. And you know, most probably another 10 or 20 winemakers will tell you the same story. It becomes very repetitive, but you just have to go back maybe to the drawing board and say, how do you want to approach the thing? There's plenty of good wines out there. You want to be truthful against the specific terroir of what you produce. And that is most probably the most satisfaction you get back when you have something reflecting your place. And you will not winning over, and you don't have to win over everybody, but I think you can be yourself and say, look, this is what that little corner of my piece of land produces on a yearly basis, and it's a reflection about how do you farm, it's a reflection about how the vintage brings along different weather patterns, and it's overall, it should be slightly different every year, otherwise it is like a cool drink, and we're not making cool drinks, we're making terroir-driven wines, and I think that is end of the day, I really getting less and less excited about these big blind tastings and to throwing score at each other, because it is what Craig said before, some wines they maybe perform very well with food, some other wines are showing off in the flight and say, wow, that's the most attractive right now, but when you eat, suddenly you say, oh, that one who was maybe the dark sheep in the lineup suddenly shines. And I think that is where wine becomes it's actually irrelevant to measure, because you can't measure. And the human being want to measure, they want to really tell you what is the best. And even myself, because I think most of persons sitting around the table like this, you want to be good in what you do. But when it comes to wine, it becomes, in a way, I think you have to be able to take a step back and just really be chilled and just reflect yourself and say, look, this is maybe my preference, this is my preference, but doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to cover you yourself. And I think when you come in that kind of mindset in this industry, I think you're much better off. And it's also an age thing. When I was very young, I thought to myself, shit, my wine has to be the best. And older you get, you start to realize, shit, there's a lot of good wines around, you know, and you suddenly start to say, it's maybe not just the world just waiting for you yourself. And but it's, and I don't say that just on the Hemel and Arten gatherings. It is for me the most relevant point when it comes to wine is when you see your neighbors performing well in wine. Suddenly you start to realize the cultivar is suitable to that place. Because I think most of the persons in this industry are dedicated to make a good wine. But when you have the nature generous on your side, I would expect that you come up with a good wine, because you shouldn't stuff up a good quality grape. You should make a good wine. And I think the Hemel and Arten, the success story for me to reflecting Pinot Noir from the Hemel and Arten is that I can send my customers and say, go and up and down, taste the valley, and they will all come back and say, hey, there's good Pinot Noirs in this valley. And I think that is something to reflect at, that when it comes to South Africa, and I never would down talk another region, but when in South Africa we're talking about Pinot Noir, I really be very comfortable in my statement to say you have to go to the Hemel and Arten to be really credible to talk about Pinot Noir in quality. There will be some other regions also popping up to make good quality, but overall as a wine region, I mean, we in the Hemel and Arten, we have just a very strong hold on this cultivar, and it's good for us. And I think there we proved ourselves for 10, 15 years in this category of Pinot Noir. I think each wine list, when you see Pinot Noir, it's Hemel and Arten.
And I would hate for any of us to taste the same, because we don't.
Yeah.
And just kind of what you're saying, that throwing off the shackles of adding stuff. You're basically making yourself naked. You're going onto the beach, you're going to throw everything off and say, this is me. And but
I'll get locked up.
You warn up front, man.
That's exactly it.
It's okay.
That's exactly it. Some of it is
And as we get older, we don't care. You see. That's what you said.
Exactly. You say that. You're older than me. You should help me here now, Craig.
it's warts and all.
I
But
think
at least it's the truth.
It's
and it's interesting.
Yeah.
we're very lucky here. We've got every terroir in the world is manipulated by man to a degree, but we've got a very high level to start from in the Emul and Arten. I think it's
it's when a lot of people say, we've got this bit of an old world thing or a bit of a Burgundian. It's not Burgundian. I think the thing we've probably learned from the Burgundians is just observing.
Yeah.
Observe and
So,
learn.
easy to
Well, I think people say that because it's not South Africa. Do you know what, it doesn't feel to them like every other region that is able to produce Pinot Noir, so they feel this need to almost say it must be like something that already existed.
It's an easy reference to something that everyone knows.
Can you just cut it so that I go before JC? I'd like to end on that, please. I don't want to follow that in the... No, so this is about 70% 115 and 30% 777. So predominant, strong 30%. So it was interesting because anyone who knows our sort of brand is that our uniqueness, I think, is in that we bottle age significantly before release. So like 2019, every year when we have to put our wines into comparative vintages, I always am like, because our current vintage we've just moved into is 2015. So for me to pour a 19 when I know it is not nearly at a point where I would like to be releasing it, it's still for me has got quite a lot of tannin structure, which I think that needs to matter. The acid's still quite high for me. But what was interesting is as we've been going through the wines, and that's why I'm quite thankful we were the last wine, it has started to open up a little bit, which I think is indicative of what may happen with a little bit more bottle aging. So if you've bought the Pinot Noir Celebration case, drink all the other wines and stick the other one in the cupboard, open it in 6 years' time. But no, it's interesting because 2019 for us, I think the same as a lot of what everyone else said. It was our lowest yield in 5 years. So it was really at a turning point where we realized there's a lot we need to do to give back into the soil. And that's really where Shane's taken over and spent the last, 3-4 years really trying to do sustainable farming and doing as much as possible as putting back into the land. And I've seen there was a lot of comments on how beautiful 2021 was as a vintage. I know we're talking about 19, but I've seen that growth in the vineyards from 18 to 19, 20 to 21. I can honestly say I think we pulled the best crop we ever have of our farm in 2021. And that's why, every vintage is slightly different. Some years, as you say, are learning ones where the style of wine you get shows you that there is something that needs to change or be done. So I love the wine for what it is. But yeah, something I think that's stylistically different to what we normally produce as a Pinot Noir. We had about 20% whole bunch in here. We don't always do whole bunch, and I think it shows quite a bit in the wine. But other than that, quite a high natural acidity in our Pinot Noirs, and because of that exact reason, definitely needs a lot of bottle aging before release. Same thing next year, we're celebrating our 20-year anniversary of buying the farm, which is always very exciting. And I've seen over the last 5 years, like you were talking about, Craig, that vineyard development in the wine and the huge significance it makes from that 10 to 15 to 20 year mark. And I think really very minimal intervention winemaking here, and I love tasting from our very first vintage up till now, because it shows you the whole journey of the vineyard age more than anything else. Because obviously in the beginning, when you got more fruit driven Pinot Noirs, you adjust your winemaking style slightly, but it gets to a point where that is your house style, that is the way you're going to make Pinot Noir, and then it's really just an expression of each vintage and each additional year of growth on the vineyards and tasting that through the wine. So yeah, I like that it's stylistically different in 2019. I think, as everyone said, a very memorable year for the whole region. So, yeah. I don't know if there's any questions.
I love the energy that we've got through all. I mean, we usually get pretty good acidity and liveliness in the wine, but this is, for me, as a flight, if you consider it's a snapshot of the whole area, we've done well.
It's a very good story.
I love how you see how the structure of the wine kind of changes as you go up in the appellation, and how we ended up with the region. There's more structure, there's more tannins, and I think especially you putting emphasis on bottle aging. I think the fact that you made use of the whole bunch and the tannin structure you had in the wine, and obviously the bright acidity is going to help with that aging. But I think all in all, 2019 showed very well throughout the 3 wards. It's a very good vintage.
A great one. We can be proud to hang our hats on.
I'm still not 100% buying in the kind of thing about the 3 wards be significant different. I still think it's pretty much driven by the individuals of farming, winemaking, philosophy, putting into the whole context, and I also not would like to be myself in the position to say defending now this is a specific wort, that's the reason why it's this direction of stylistic of wine, or this is the wort because of this. I think, and this wine shows for me again, I wouldn't be able to say pinpoint easily out, okay, that's because it's a rich or because it's a valley or upper. Exactly, I think there's so much going on. The farms are relatively young, and even on our farm, I mean, we have different styles, and you have different styles. You will experience when you see now more plantings coming along, you will have different expression of Pinot Noir on your kind of 500 meters next to each other. And that's therefore, I mean, obviously we can't take the stand and say we want to be specific to say this is now the upper, this is the valley, this is the rich, but I still think there's so much going on between, the wood regime, the whole bunch, the interaction, how much you punch down or you don't punch down. There's so much thing going on, and Burgundy took a long time, to get, and even in Burgundy, I mean, when you drink Richebourg, it doesn't mean it tastes Richebourg. There is like 5-6 producers, and each wine has a bit of a different expression. It would be nice in a way to say, okay, it is a rich or is a valley or is a upper, but I don't think we desperately have to do that. You know, I think be proud of the quality overall, and be proud of everybody who brings new products in this kind of region and is good and is a proud producer of Pinot Noir. But
I find it. I sort of agree and disagree. I think in the Emul Valley, us in Hamilton, Russell, Bouchard, we've got very, very similar soil. I think pretty much the same way our Pinot grows, and I think that sort of shows for me in the wines generally. Not every vintage. I think 19 is a vintage that was quite easy across the whole area. No, but maybe I do. No, I do because maybe I worked with everything. But
from 19, I mean.
But I think 19, if you looked at wine quality and everything, it was maybe a quite easy all over. But I can speak from experience. Is, you know, we can have no rain or 30 millimeters, and if you drive past La Vierge's cellar, it's dry on the road all the way up to the ridge. And I think in the upper Emul as well, there's you know, it's geographically the biggest region or the biggest appellation, and it's there's a bit more soil variance there, I think, and the Pinots are planted on quite a variety of different soils, and then the ridge, you've got all those different aspects. So I think it's, you know, where Burgundies they've had hundreds of years to pinpoint little slopes, rows. I mean, you've got Natasha and a pitching wedge further, you've got a vineyard that's almost insignificant in the bigger scheme. So I think we'll get there. I think it's a great process to participate in, and to really it forces us to fine tune what we're doing instead of making generic Pinot Noirs. So I think I like the idea of it. You can buy into it or not, but I think it's better to be focused on the detail instead of just taking a broad brushstroke on everything.
What was your rainfall? And it's like 2-3 times what we've got. And then just that cloud blanket, you drive in and it's just like driving to white. And it's boiling further down the region.
We're less than a kilometer from Sumerich, which is our neighbours.
But sometimes people like to have the rain, and it doesn't alright. So it's not just good. It's a problem all the way around. You know?
But I always find Sumerich is also where there's a line normally.
But then this year, Craig had a lot of.
Now it becomes interesting. Now we've got full conversations.
Yeah, there's too many conversations in one.
But it's true. We in fact had 63. You had about 80, and then you had 20. So
and then later we were luckily done with harvest, but that rain that came in sort of mid March, I think. I remember looking up and we had a drizzle, and above, sort of along the mountain range.
We had some cab irrigation.
It was like this cloud break. I thought, what did Craig do wrong? What did he say? It's like,
even the crazy thing is like you'll say, just in terms of picking, like the differential in terms of picking, like you'll say, okay, I bought up all my sunny plant.
The Hamilton Valley starts in spring, normally 2 weeks earlier than we on the ridge. And these 2 weeks, you never catch up because the plant starts to grow. That means it flowers 2 weeks earlier and you pick 2 weeks earlier. So when there's not any unexpected thing, is you will pick earlier than we up there because our winter is colder, we have frost up there, we have minus temperatures. That means in the spring times,
discern the granite. I can get stuck sometimes between ridge and the lower part, but there's a strange back of the palate as you swallow sensation to the granite soil. And your wine and my wine are relatively different, but I can pick up the same. There's like a 5% something, and I could never put my finger on it, in those wines where and I can only deduce from it that it's a soil derived thing, because it's there in our two different style wines, the same thing I get in both of them.
All you and Cordy are buying together too much and
I
just
think,
rubbing off on each other.
I think
No, it's just a bit of swap.
No, but this clonal experiment you're going to do first, Craig, is going to show us all of that.
Yeah.
We'll have the same clonal.
The same winemaker making.
I'm so glad you volunteered me because it's going to be revolutionary.
for your wine.
and I had nothing better to do either.
For your recoveries. Suddenly Salva's going to see what? 780 litres recovery on Pinot Noir. How is that possible? It's vintage, my friend.
But I think there's a good opportunity for. I think there's a good opportunity for everyone to work with the same barrel and make
As a tester.
vinify the wine identically, put it into the same wood.
But then you need the same hand
a different
doing
cellar
it.
makes a big difference.
Yeah,
It needs
sure,
to be in
sure,
one
sure.
cellar
you've got
and one
all that
winemaker.
Because yours is full of Saccharomyces and mine's full of Ecotita.
I mean, to get the cellar signature. I mean, your wine is a Hamilton Russell wine. For me, stylistically.
Because of the oak, probably.
I don't know, but I just say stylistically.
But that's what I'm saying, cellar flora.
And there's not a lot of grapes from your farm, as you said, to the circumstances. So it's
so
definitely
it has a huge effect.
It has a huge effect.
Yeah, of course.
Obviously,
Probably the most significant effect.
I think so because you have a lot of interaction and everybody says yes, as I do. We take a back seat, we don't do a lot, but still you do a lot of
you are
things.
doing.
Everyone's like minimum to them.
No, but there's
But then you decide, you do a lot.
There's different temperatures, there's different
Absolutely.
vessels, there's all sorts of. There's Craig vessels, Neil vessels.
It would be very interesting to do the project if you use
a one
small amount
spot,
of
yeah.
grapes from every single farm.
Yeah, that's
If you used a little bit of grapes from every single farm and one person made it and did the same wine making style to then taste actually farm by farm, appellation by appellation.
Are we selling next year's wine journey here? Sounds very cool.
Can you imagine if it was just for... Anyway, talk about that.
And cut.
Thank you so much, guys.